So you want to modify your LS1 to get that power that you desire. Well, I can tell you that you're in the right place with this video because today we're going to talk about all the options that you have for modifying an LS1. From a lid to heads and cam, we're going to cover it all, and we'll talk about your horsepower expectations for each mod, all the parts you'll need to get the job done, and most importantly, how much it's all going to cost. Stick around, you're not going to want to miss this. Modifying an engine can be one of the most exhilarating things that a car owner does. You pick the parts, you pick the sound. Although it can be a little bit scary because there's really no right or wrong way to do it, and if you rely on the forums for most of your information, you may come out more confused than you went in. So that's why I made this video. I did my engine build 2 years ago. I did heads, cam, intake, exhaust, full bolt-on for an LS1. And I want to pass on every bit of knowledge that I learned during that build onto you. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to talk about your engine build. So there's 3 major things that you want to think about before you start your build. The first thing is, what are your plans for the car? Is this going to be a street car or a track car? Is it going to be a daily driver or a Sunday driver? So these are the kinds of things you want to think about as far as what you're going to use the car for and how far you want to go with your build. The second thing you want to think about is, what are your horsepower goals? Deciding the horsepower goals that you have for the car is going to be really crucial in the beginning because it's really going to shape the modifications that you do early on. The third thing you want to think about, and most important, is what is your budget? Now, money does not grow on trees, and as much as us car enthusiasts wish we had an unlimited amount of it, we don't. So we need to spend our money sparingly. Modifying the car can be one of the most expensive things that you do. And I promise you, when you start, you're going to dig that hole and it's going to get deeper and deeper. But that's why I made this video, to prevent you from doing that. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you every single part that I purchased and every single cost of those parts to do my heads and cam. We're going to talk about headers, intakes, heads, cam, part selection, everything in this one video. So let's jump right into it. Modifying an LS1. There's so much that you can do. So let's start at the ground zero. You have a bone stock LS1. Your first modification really should be an SLP lid. Not only does it look way better than the stock one, I mean, just look at that thing. It's so bulky and ugly. It'll give you a little bit more horsepower. So throw an SLP lid on there, improve the looks of the car, gain a couple ponies, and throw a K&N air filter while you're in there. Now, with this mod, don't expect to feel any difference. You may feel a tiny bit of throttle response, but don't expect to feel any horsepower gains from this modification. But the premise is, we want to get your engine breathing, and intake is the first modification for that. So the second thing you want to do if you're just moving along the lines and you're upgrading slowly is get a tune. If you're on the stock tune, get a performance tune done to it. Now this is going to increase by about 15 to 20 horsepower bone stock. Now, one important thing to remember when we're talking about this is all these modifications build on each other. So for example, if you were to get a tune after just getting intake and headers and cam, you're going to gain 50 horsepower from that tune, but you had the supporting mods to go with it. If you have a bone stock LS1 and you get a performance tune on it, you can expect 15 to 20 horsepower, but I wouldn't look to have that pants in the, or I wouldn't look to be thrown back in the seat when you drive the car afterwards. Get the shift points checked out. A good person to look at is Frost on the forums. Type in Frost on LS1 Tech, you'll see exactly, you'll get linked to his website. He did my base tune, it's like 130 bucks. You mail in the PCM, he mails it back, you're good to go. So that is your second modification, is getting a tune. Now, your third thing, of course, we have the engine breathing a little better with the lid. Now we want to do an intake manifold. So your intake manifold, if you have a 98, 99, or 2000 LS1, you have the LS1 intake manifold. The 01 and the 02 LS1s came with the LS6 intake manifold. The way you can tell is there's a flat bottom on the LS6, whereas the LS1 is a little more rounded. LS6 intake manifold is going to net you alone about 10 to 15 horsepower. Not a whole lot, but when you have the supporting mods, you're going to feel that big difference. And especially if you're doing something like cam and heads, whatever, you do not want to keep that LS1 intake on there. So 15 to 20 horsepower, and I'm going to get through all these prices at the end of the video, by the way. I'm going to have a list, I have a cheat sheet here of all the prices of everything that you can expect to pay for this, as well as every gasket you need to replace, every lifters. We're going to have everything here. So your next thing, so we got the lid, we got the throttle body. Your next thing for a bolt-on is going to be some exhaust work, get some headers. Some long tube headers is going to be your best performing headers. Mid-range headers, not really going to give you the power that you're looking for. You want to go with the long tube. I went with 1 7/8 inch. You can also get 1 3/4. Now, stainless steel is going to be your best friend here. If you want to show off your engine and you want to show how pretty those headers look, you need to go with the stainless steel headers. I went with the Texas Speed stainless steel. And then the second aspect that you want to think about here is, do you want to go with an off-road Y pipe or do you want to get a catted Y pipe? Talk about the differences there. An off-road Y pipe has no cats. Technically, it's not legal, and if you live in a smog-tested area, by the way, you can't even do headers if you live in a smog-tested area, but the off-road Y pipe is going to give you more of a gas smell, especially on your first startup. So the reason that I went with the catted Y pipe is a lot of people were complaining that they leave or they get home in their garage and their clothes smell like gas the whole day. I did not want to be that person. I hate the smell of gas fumes unless it's at the racetrack. I mean, there's a difference between gas fumes and exhaust, unburned fuel. It's not a good smell. So I went with the catted Y pipe, again from Texas Speed, and it is fantastic. No gas smell. It's not going to rob your horsepower that much. It's a little foam thing in there that collects the deposits. So I would highly suggest doing the catted Y pipe on the exhaust there. 3 inch out the back, and then if you want to, you can replace your exhaust. So I have an electric cutout, and I also have a MagnaFlow catback. The MagnaFlow is a little more restrictive than some of the other ones like your Corsa or Borla, stuff like that. But when I had the car stock, I didn't want something super aggressive and super loud, so I went with the MagnaFlow, and I was pretty happy with that. Although, do not expect a horsepower increase from just a muffler. I hope I don't have to explain that to people. You may get 3 horsepower from changing the catback. Don't expect to feel anything. It's all pure sound. But going back to the headers, if you put on headers 1 7/8 inch or 1 3/4 inch, that's the most popular, you can roughly expect 15 to 17 horsepower. You go on the forums, you look up the dyno numbers, this is what people are getting. And there's a lot of people that lie about horsepower numbers, which I've never understood that. As LS1 Tech is full of these fibbers that say, I got 35 horsepower from headers only. Well, did you get the car tuned? Well, yeah. Okay, so 20 of those horses is from the tune alone, and then you can attribute another 15 or so to the headers. So, like I said, these all build on each other, so you want to make sure you take that into consideration. If you're just doing headers on the car, you're not going to feel a big difference in the performance of it. There's going to be a little bit, and actually, it's going to kill the back pressure a little bit, so you may actually feel that throw back in the seat a little bit less because it'll kill a little bit of torque, but you may have higher horsepower numbers. So something to consider there. So now we've covered intake manifold, throttle body if you want to include it. I actually did not do a throttle body. Unless you're upgrading to a fast 9090 or something like that for an intake manifold, upgrading the intake throttle body, sorry, got mixed up there. Upgrading the intake throttle body is not going to net you very much because you have a hole this big, right? So this is your intake. If you have a hole this big and then you go to a hole this big, but then it then has to travel back through a hole this big, you're really not getting more air in there. So the intake manifold, the diameter of that intake is really what's going to control that. So once you get a, like I said, a bigger intake manifold hole, then you can support this, then your throttle body gets bigger, then your actual intake gets bigger. So unless you're doing that mod, I would stay away from a throttle body, and maybe you can get yours ported, but I've seen people have issues with that, with idles. Okay, so let's talk about the big boys. What is the best modification that you can do to an LS1? Not talking about transmission, because all you auto guys, I know you're going to comment and say stall is the best thing. Now, if you're on an auto car, a torque converter is probably the best modification you can get. Doesn't really add much power, but the drivability and having it stay in that torque range is what really gives you the gains for that. But we're not talking about transmission. We're talking about the LS1. So we're talking about the motor. So what is the best thing that you can do to an LS1 to gain power? Camshaft. Camshaft is the centrifuge of the entire engine, and it literally goes in the middle of the engine. So if you don't know what the camshaft does, it is this thing that plugs into the center, plugs into the middle of the motor, and it rotates. So what it does is it opens and closes the valves via push rods. So you got the camshaft, you get the push rods, and this opens and closes the valves. Why does upgrading LS1 camshaft give you so much more power? Well, those valves are going to be open longer, meaning more air is going to get into the engine, meaning more fuel is going to get burned along with it, meaning more power. So when you have those valves open for longer, you're getting all that air in there, and that's what's really making that power. And that's why the bigger the camshaft you go with, the bigger the camshaft you go with, the rougher it's going to idle, but the better it's going to perform at higher RPMs. Because those big old camshafts, you've heard them, the blap, 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 and everyone loves their lope. That's the valve staying open, so when it's at that low RPMs and it's real low idle, it has a hard time sustaining that the firing. So, camshaft selection. I'm gonna dump so much knowledge into you right now. Please consume this. I have spent hundreds of hours researching camshafts. This is the first camshaft I ever did on my car. The duration I went with, I'll tell you in a second. I went with a small cam though. So basically you break down camshafts into about 3 different categories. You have your mild, your average, and your extreme. So let's break down each one of those. You got your mild camshafts, which is what I went with. Your mild camshafts are notable for higher torque and the lower RPMs, and that mid to low range power. Now, that does not mean that they don't produce awesome power in the higher RPMs. They absolutely do. However, the average and the other two higher categories will produce a lot more horsepower up at the top end. End. If you're below 3,500 RPMs or so, you're really not going to be making that much power. Those bigger camshafts love those high-end RPMs. So your mild camshafts, you're going to be looking something between like 212 all the way up to about 224 intake and exhaust duration. So anywhere in between there, I would gauge it as a mild camshaft. So I went with 216, 224, 551 lift, so that's the amount of lift that the valve is going to get, and a 15 LSA. Now your LSA is really going to play a big part in the idle chop that you get. Do some research on it. It's kind of hard to explain with the LSA. The lower the LSA, goes from about 12 to 17. The lower the LSA, the more chop you're typically going to get unless you have a really good tuner to tune it out. So mild camshafts, let's go to the average camshafts. Anything with a duration between about 224 and 230 is going to be your average LS1 F-body owner. That's what they're going to get. Usually it's like the 224R or 224, 230 duration. There's all sorts of, you go on Summit Racing and there are literally thousands of different camshaft durations that you can search for. So again, like I said, these camshafts are going to be good for about 3,500 RPMs on, and they make fantastic power. You can do a cam only LS1 with maybe an intake and headers or so. When I say cam only, I mean interior work, not just bolt-ons. And you can get upwards of 380 to 390 horsepower running in the 12 seconds for the quarter mile. I mean, these things make fantastic power, so it's no wonder most people go with these. The downside to them is you're going to get some aggressive lope. So I highly suggest when you're picking a camshaft, go on YouTube and listen to the different sounds that people have put. People are nice enough to put tons of videos on there with idling at different cam durations and different setups, so you can hear what you can expect when you go with a different camshaft, one versus another. So this brings us on to our third category, the extreme cams. So these I wouldn't personally even consider unless I was doing a track car. Especially if you're auto, you don't want to go this high with your camshaft because you're going to have terrible drivability unless you have a huge torque converter in this thing. So extreme is going to be 230 duration and up. Now these are going to have super aggressive lopes. They're going to make shit tons of power, excuse my language, and they're overall, if you're looking for raw performance, you don't care about drivability, you don't care about it stalling every now and then, you want a track car on the road, you want to go with a 230 or above. So like I said, go on YouTube, watch all of these camshafts, watch the videos and listen, and start from the beginning documenting what you like and what you don't like. Another important thing is don't disregard a cam just because you're like, oh, that one sounds like crap, it's not going to be me. Well, it could be. You have no idea what the tune was, what the factors were, and just take into consideration that any of those cars, yours could end up sounding like this. This is like I said, the centrifuge of the engine is the camshaft. So important. Do your research. You'll be fine though. Just listen to what you want to do. So when you're running a camshaft, you can expect to gain about 35 to 70 horsepower, depending on the camshaft you select and your supporting mods. If you go camshaft only and you go with a lower duration, you're looking at that 35 horsepower range. The more supporting mods that you get, and also the bigger the camshaft you get, you're going to go further down that high horsepower range. So that's about what you can expect with a camshaft. There's a lot of variance there, and there's a lot of factors that come into a camshaft. So it's kind of hard to nail it down any further than that. So going on to heads. You have so many options with heads on an LS1. I went with probably the cheapest option because, little backstory, and the reason I'm really making this video is I was only going to do headers and cam on my car. And I was told that I needed to do lifters as well. The car had 90,000 miles on it, and 3 shops that I called said, you have to do the lifters. You would be stupid not to do it. That's what comes in direct contact with the camshaft, and if that camshaft had any wear on it, those lifters have wear as well. And if you break a lifter, you're basically toasting your engine. You're going to blow your engine. The shrapnel that comes off of these LS1 lifters, any lifter, when they break, is ridiculous, and it causes thousands and thousands of dollars to repair. So to replace the lifters, heads got to come off. And I'm the type of person that when the heads come off, the stock heads are not going back on. So I went with some LS6, some 243 casting heads, and I had them ported. That is about your cheapest option for doing heads. I bought them for $300 on eBay, got them ported for like $250 at a local machine shop, and then had them slapped on. So they're gonna net you decent power. I'll tell you exactly what my car has 380 rear wheel horsepower. I'll tell you now, I don't care. 374 foot-pounds of torque. And I have the 243 ported LS6 heads, the 216, 224 cam, 1 7/8 inch stainless steel headers, LS6 intake manifold, SLP lid, catted white pipe. Those are like the main things of power adders that I have, and I made 380 horsepower. Had I went with more aggressive cam and more aggressive heads, I would have been in the low to mid-range 400s. It could have been crazy, but I went on the mild side because I wanted to daily drive the car. So looking at heads, you can spend from $300 for the LS6 heads all the way up to $4,000 on a pair of heads, depending on what your budget is, that most important thing that we talked about in the beginning, and what your horsepower gains are. Another thing we talked about that you should have planned before you got to this point. So when you're looking for heads, go on Texas Speed, go on Summit, see what they have offering. You can get some like stage 2.5 PRC heads for like $1,700. Those things make fantastic power no matter what cam you're running. Although if you're doing one or the other, I would go with a cam. That's really going to net you the more power. So when you're talking about heads, the amount of horsepower that you can expect, again, like I said multiple times during this video, it depends on what other sporting mods you have. In general, not including the tune horsepower gains or the other sporting mods, in general, from heads alone, you can expect to gain about 15 to 35 horsepower, depending on what stage you go with, whether they're ported, how they flow down, how much they were grinded down, and those sort of factors that weigh into it. So, okay, so we talked about a lot of stuff today, and we threw a lot of parts out there. So now it's time for me to come through with my promise. Let's talk about every single part you're gonna need for every single one of these modifications I said, and what they're gonna cost to do. So let's start off with the exhaust parts. Your headers, if you get now this is everything that I bought, and I told you what I bought. I went with Texas Speed headers, $430. You're gonna need the header bolts, which are about $40. Your header gasket, of course, $20. Now I went with the Texas Speed Y-pipe with the cats, which is $325. If you went with an off-road Y-pipe, you can get that for about $200. O2 extensions, which are about $40. And then that's it for the exhaust. So you're looking at a total in parts for exhaust about $855. So going on to the intake. So LS6 intake manifold, I bought a used one for $350. They usually range about $400 used. So you just gotta keep your eye out, look on eBay, and that's usually about the price. Those fast 90/90 intakes I mentioned earlier, you're not spending less than $1,000 and you get a stellar deal and it's used. So that's why I went with the smaller one, but they still produce great power. And then the only thing you need there is your intake manifold gaskets, which are $15. Change out every gasket as you do them. And I'm gonna talk about the while you're in there parts in a little bit, but let's go to the important stuff. Heads and cam parts, what are you gonna need? So of course you're gonna need the heads. My 243 heads was $320. You're gonna need the head gasket, $40. Get a decent head gasket, by the way. Don't go with a cheap gasket. Get something that's reputable because you do not wanna blow that thing. Head porting, this is an optional cost, but $350. ARP head bolts. Now, this one really hurt. $200 for those ARP head bolts. They're reusable though, so it was a little easier, but oh my goodness, $200 on bolts was hard. Camshaft, $300. Again, these prices vary a lot based on the duration you get, the make, the model. So one thing you'll need when you're doing the camshaft is the camshaft retainer plate with the bolts. You will need the bolts with it. You cannot reuse your existing bolts. I bought some LS7 lifters, like I mentioned. You need to do those when you're doing it. $100. They're in there already, so go ahead and do the lifter trays. Push rods, a must when you're doing a camshaft. Hardened push rods and valve springs, another must. $250 for the valve springs, $100 for the push rods. So those are gonna really support your camshaft, and with that higher lift that you're getting, it's gonna make sure you don't break something while you're in there. So, speaking of while you're in there, while you're doing all this, I'm a person that unfortunately had to pay someone to do all this work. I don't have the tools, I don't have the time, I don't have the space. So I had to pay someone to do the labor, and I'm the type of person, I want to do it one time and I want to do it right. So here are all the while you're in there parts so that you can do this right. If you're taking the engine apart, you want to replace the aspects that could potentially break. So, ported LS6 oil pump. The oil pumps tend to go out around 100,000 miles. Even if you're less than that, I would highly suggest changing it out. LS2 timing chain. So the LS2 is a good one for there. The timing chain, they have to take it off to replace it, or to put the camshaft in. Replace it, it's $120. By the way, sorry, the ported LS6 pump is $200. You're taking all this stuff off. Water pump gaskets, $8. Drive belts, $30. They're all coming off anyway. Valve cover gaskets for when you're changing the valve springs, $15. The last thing, spark plugs. If you've ever changed the spark plugs on the LS1, you know how much of a pain in the ass it is. It's all the way in the back, behind the exhaust. Have them replace them while all this stuff is off. So that brings us to our grand total, parts total of $3,338 for all the parts that I've paid for the heads and the cam and intake, everything. Now, what was my labor cost? Now I can tell you that doubled from what the shop told me. My labor cost was $2,300. So that brings us to a grand total of $5,638 to add roughly 80 horsepower to my car. Now, when you look at that, you may be a little bit disappointed, as I was with the numbers, but having the car for as long as I have, I can say I'm happy that I did the work. Doing this work, and if I had done the labor myself, I mean, that's $2,300 there. So doing the work, the car is so fun to drive. It's such a blast. And you think about it, how much are you going to spend on a car payment if you buy a new vet or buy a new car? You're going to spend that $5,000 in 1 year. So if you love your car, you want to keep your car, you want to have some more fun with it, it's definitely worth it. It's something to consider, and I had a blast. So another thing to note before I close off this video, which I hope it was helpful to someone, because I put so much research and so much time into finding out all of these different parts, and everything just pops up, that I hope you find this informational, is know that when you do a big job like this, your rear end and your transmission are potentially going to be on the fritz. So in that first part where you're planning your budget, it would be advantageous to consider those things. So my rear end started howling about 1,000 miles into the heads and cam, and my transmission started slipping after about 3,000 miles. So I had to get both of those taken care of. Like I said, you open up the hole and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. That's it for today, guys. I hope you found this informational. I hope it helps someone. I spent so much time on the forums with such misinformation that I just wanted to come out and give it to everyone and make sure that everyone's informed and they know what they're getting themselves into when they start modifying their engines. So awesome. Have a good day. Comment. Tell me what you think about the video. Tell me what you are doing with your car mods. I love hearing about people and their builds and various things that they're doing. So let me know what you're doing, and have a great day. Thank you.